Welcome to this episode of the Dropout Multi-Millionaire Podcast, where we talk about tactical business strategy, building high-performance sales teams, and growing your business. If you're ready to break free from the status quo and join the ranks of the mavericks, the rebels, and the renegades who refuse to conform and instead build multi-million-dollar businesses, then buckle up, because here we go. Welcome back to the Dropout Multi-Millionaire Podcast. I am your host, Brian Will. And today's episode is going to be based on my Wall Street Journal best-selling book, The Psychology of Sales and Negotiation, which coincidentally is the basis of my upcoming big launch, which is the Psychology of Sales Masterclass. I want to cover in this episode what we call the top 3 sales tips that you need to learn if you want to move from being an average salesperson to being one of the best in your field. All of these tips are psychology-based things that you need to learn, and not what I call cheesy sales lines or gimmicks. The Psychology of Sales training course is not about manipulating people into doing something that they don't want to do. It's about helping them finalize the decision they already wanted to make before they came to see you. And I want you to think about it like this. I love this example. One of the companies I own is a restaurant chain. Now picture a couple coming into a restaurant. The server takes them, sits them down at their table, and comes up and says, "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Couple. How can I help you today?" Now picture the couple sitting there going, "Oh, we didn't really come here to get food. We just came here to sit and watch people." Now that's a ridiculous example, but that is exactly the example I want you to think about, because when people come to see you in your place of business or they have called you, they are looking to do something. They're not looking to just sit there and watch. Your job as a salesperson is to help them. It's not to pressure them, and it's not to force them. It's to help them get to the decision that they wanted to make when they walked in the door. Now, the first tip today, I'm going to start with this one, is one of the things you need to understand is that when people first meet you, whether it is face-to-face or on the phone, they are in a state of mistrust. In fact, in the training, I call this the wall of mistrust. And that wall is between you and your client. They don't trust you. And this state of mistrust is actually an emotional state. Now, the key to this is that people in general are always operating in one of two states, no matter what they do. They are either being emotional or they are being logical. And the secret is that they cannot be both emotional and logical at the same time. Further, the problem with them being in the emotional state is that people that are in the emotional state tend to make rash decisions. And many times, those decisions are wrong. They just aren't thinking logically. And so I ask you a question. How many times have you been in a conversation with someone who's emotional? Do you think that they are thinking straight? And the answer is no. And back to our challenge is that when you first meet somebody and you are a salesperson and that wall of mistrust is up, they are immediately on guard. They don't trust you, and that's an emotional response to the fact that you're a salesperson. Now, your job as the salesperson is going to be infinitely harder when your client is remaining in that emotional state. So your job right out of the gate is to move them from that emotional state into a logical state so that they can begin to really listen to you. In the training course, we call this the first objection. And we outline how to overcome that objection so that we can move our clients along through the process logically and not while they are still emotional. And we use techniques like taking away the unknown and taking away the fear of being sold. We give our client what we call the illusion of control by giving them the option up front to say no, whatever it is that we're selling. Everything we do in the beginning of the sales process in our training is to help move that client out of the emotional state and into a logical one. That's the first tip today. The second sales tip is what I call the difference between active and passive listening. And this is a big one. And I see the majority of salespeople fail at this day in and day out. Salespeople tend to think that they need to be talking in order to be in control of a conversation or a situation. And the truth is that that's actually the opposite of what you need to be doing. In fact, the person that is in the greatest control of your sales process is the person listening, not the person talking. You see, most people can't wait to talk. They're what we call passive listeners. When the client is talking, they're just waiting on their turn. And in their head, they're thinking, when is my turn? Are they almost done? I have so much to say. I have so much to teach them. I have a script either in front of me or in my head that I need to start reading. That's called passive listening. What they should be doing is active listening. Active listeners are studying the client while they're talking. They're looking at their body language, their facial expressions when they say certain things. They should be asking the person questions so that that client will give up all the information they need to know on how to sell their product or service, on how to position their product or service so that it solves whatever problem that the client came here looking to solve. If you are asking questions and actively listening, and then using what you've learned to make what we call a connective response, you are actually learning how to sell your client while they're talking. If all you're doing is talking, guess what? Your client is learning why they don't want to buy your product or service. And yes, we teach active listening and connective response in the fact-finding phase of the sales process in the course. All right, that's number 2. Let's move on to number 3. So finally, I want to talk about the 3 types of personalities of the people that you will deal with. And coincidentally, these are also the same 3 types of personalities that you probably fall into. People tend to give and receive information in one of 3 ways, and it relates to their personality type. And most people fall into one of these. The first is what we call the assertive or the driver personality. The second is the emotional or the adaptive. And the third is just a data-driven person. Just give me the facts. This applies to both you as the business owner or the salesperson, and it applies to the client that you're talking to. The challenge we have sometimes is that your personality or the way you give information is different than the way the other person receives it. And this is amplified in a sales situation because you are trying to sell something to somebody who already doesn't trust you. Think about it like this. Let's say that you're a driver and you've been through sales training and you're trying to sell to an emotional. You are pushing for the sale. Don't let them leave. Keep overcoming objections, just like you were taught. The problem here is that you are coming across as pushy, and that wall of mistrust is staying in place. Let's change it up and say that you're an emotional and you're trying to sell to a data-driven person. While you're doing your best to appeal to their emotional side, all they want is the facts. You will come across as uneducated and not understanding what really matters to the client. What if you're a data person and you're trying to sell to an emotional? The emotional will quickly become overwhelmed and they will stop listening. They just want to feel good about the product or the service or what it's going to do for them. Now I can go through a dozen examples here, but the key is to ask the client questions and try to find out who you are talking to up front. Once you have identified the client's personality, you need to adapt the way that you give them information to the way that they will best receive it. And by the way, this also applies to you. You need to understand who you are so that you can recognize and adapt your personality to the person that you're talking to. Now, all this is done once again in the fact-finding phase of the training course. Now, there are a lot more things to learn here, but these are the 3 foundation principles of the psychology of sales and negotiation. So that's it for today. If you want more information or do you want to get the training course, it is available on my website at a discounted rate at brianwillmedia.com. Everything I talk about is also in my Wall Street Journal best-selling book, The Psychology of Sales and Negotiation. If you have any other questions or you would like to talk about personal training for you or your organization, my email, brian@brianwillmedia.com. That's easy. Drop me a message. And finally, remember, and I say this all the time, you have to be in the game to win the game. So let's get in the game. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you would like to get more information on either one of my books or my one-on-one coaching programs, you can find me at brianwillmedia.com or thedropoutmm.com.